The embargo has lifted on the press preview build for Age of Wonders 4. Obviously, the Dragon Dawn DLC is here and it's real and it's releasing on the 20th of June. But in this video, I want to share with you some of the things that I've found playing through this version of the game that will be included in the free update. These are the changes that everyone will get to experience, and it includes some new features, and quite frankly, they've taken a sledgehammer to the metagame, in particular the development tree, but also some other areas. So in this video, I'm going to share with you what I've found, some exciting changes that are coming in the upcoming Wyvern Patch update, which is releasing for free alongside the Dragon Dawn DLC. The best place to start is the main menu. You'll notice there's some new buttons down the bottom, but of course, more importantly, this Create Faction option is entirely new and entirely free. So instead of starting a game to create your factions, you can jump right in here and build them yourself. You don't need to start a game, select a realm, go through any of that stuff. You can just jump straight into the faction creator. Inside of the creator, there's also this random ruler option down the bottom if you're on the custom tab, where you can just hit a button and get something to pop out. Now in this case, as you've noticed, we've popped out a Dragon Lord. Of course, that's because I have the DLC enabled. Important to note that dragons won't be released for free. They are inside, of course, of the paid DLC pack. But you can use this random generator. You can see there are buttons down the bottom here, so I can just keep cycling through until I find a design or a build, a set of traits that I find useful or that I want to play with. It's a really nice feature, I think, just to slam in a whole load more custom factions. And if you find one that you like, you can jump in and customize it a little bit further. Maybe you liked everything it did except you wanted to be a Dragon Lord, in which case you could change that. There's also a new body trait, Poisonous, which is of course aligned with the DLC, but you'll notice it doesn't have the DLC icon like, say, Lizardfolk over here do, which indicates that it's locked behind the paywall of Dragon Dawn. The Poisonous trait seems to operate separately, so you can get a little bit of extra blight damage and melee attackers have a chance to be poisoned. Along that same line of thinking, the Artifact Hoarders, the new society trait, also appears to be free to play, added as part of the free patch update. This one does have some synergies with the new Dragon Lords. In fact, it kind of mirrors their mechanic, but for mana instead of gold. You can see here that you gain extra mana with hero items via the Artifact Hoard. Hero items in your arsenal generate additional mana income. So if you've got gear lying around, depending on its tier level, you'll generate this amount of mana, and that's per turn, by the way. So it's a pretty useful way to generate mana. You'll also notice that you gain a tier 2 or 3 hero item after clearing an Ancient Wonder or Infestation. So it kind of guarantees that you'll be able to get some gear, and of course you start with 2 random items, and then farm that for mana. If you're not sort of actively, out there striking down enemies with it, then it will generate you some income. Like I say, this of course aligns quite well with the dragons who do the same thing but with gold, so you can get mana and gold. That's the approach I'm trying in my Let's Play. It's unclear whether it's a really strong meta pick or not yet. I lean towards perhaps not, but we'll see that play out. Nonetheless, a new free society trait. Now there's a whopping 5 of them under the Materium line. Now let's jump in-game. I'll use this save file, which is from the turn where Let's Play Episode 1 ended, so we'll keep it spoiler-free for those of you who are following along in the series, but I thought that this would be a good place to show off a few different things that I've come across. In particular, some nasty changes, or potentially exciting changes, to the development tree. I think we'll start there. The development tree works essentially in 2 phases. Firstly, you unlock these abilities along the branches of the trees, and then you spend Imperium to actually take their ability, to activate their ability. What they've done is changed the unlock requirements, making it slower to unlock them, and they've also made them cost more Imperium. So it's kind of a double whammy, particularly in these earlier stages of the tree. So as an example, Materium Affinity, I have 2, so I'm earning 2 income per turn. You'll notice that the third ability here, Arcane Artisans, requires me to earn 60. Now all of these tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, seem to have had their costs increased, not only to unlock them, but crucially to buy them. Buying these things now costs extra Imperium, I believe around 50 extra. What that does essentially is really slows down the early game development through the development tree. Instead of, say, grabbing a whole load of affinities and reaching down all of these branching paths, I've found that I have to be much more focused on specifically what I want to get. I think this will put more ownership on the player to focus on the affinities that they want. And if you want to go for a multi-affinity build, it's going to cost you a lot more than it used to. The cost changes seem to largely affect the first roughly 4 unlocks in each category. It's both takes longer to accumulate the affinity that you need to unlock it, as you can see here it's 100, and costing more Imperium. In this case, I think it's gone up by 25. Not the end of the world, but at scale, it will slow you down. And of course, the general tree, likely the easiest one to unlock because all of the affinities feed in, they pool their points to unlock it each turn, has also been hit by the hammer. Even the most basic skill has doubled in cost, basic seafaring up from 50, I believe, to 100. But then as we move down, that effect is reduced. Once we start to get down around here, the costs have only increased by about 25 Imperium. Still, the same thing that we see happening in the rest of the branches, more expensive to purchase and unlock. Looking through the astral tree up the top here, I also note that almost all of these things seem to have been shifted around. Casting reserves, for example, used to be at the start. It's now moved all the way up here. Surge spellcasting down the bottom used to be something like the 6th or the 7th unlock. It's now the very first one. Casting a combat spell reduces the cost of other ones by 25% for 2 turns. And it's not alone. Basically, all of these early ones on the astral tree seem to have moved around a little bit, maybe only 1 or 2 spaces. And while lots of other branches have changed, for example, down here in Metagame, you'll notice that military engineering now only gives a 25% discount, but does start with a work camp built. So that's actually a trade-off I'm pretty happy to take on. I think it's potentially this shadow affinity tree and some of their tomes that we'll look at in a minute that's changed quite a bit. As one small example, knowledge extraction has tripled its effect. We now gain 150 knowledge per hero defeated in combat instead of 50. That seems pretty significant to me. Not just early on, but potentially later too, if you're engaging in a whole load of different fights, conflicts. And there are other ways to earn extra knowledge too. For example, all-seeing has gone up from 10 to 15. And the entire tree itself, really, apart from a few things on the list, have seen some changes. I think for the most part, this tree has been buffed, and we'll see some interesting changes to souls as we move through and start to take a look at what they've done to the tomes of magic as well. Taking a quick look at heroes, here's the dragon I created, and someone in the comments pointed out it's a lot like Spyro. I didn't intend for that to happen, but so be it. Look at that little tail. If we look at the hero screen though, you'll notice that for the dragons, they unlock some very powerful sort of nature affinity aligned skills. And it happens at levels 4, 8, 12, and 16. They've also changed that for standard heroes, so you'll get your signature skills a little bit earlier on at 4, 8, 12, 16, instead of what it used to be, which was, of course, multiples of 5, right? 5, 10, 15, 20. So a little bit of a change to heroes and how quickly we'll be able to unlock the, granted, very powerful hero skills. I believe there have been some changes to combat, including a unit's sort of critical hit chance can't be higher than the actual chance of hitting the enemy in the first place, which is great. And I'm sure there are a myriad of other fixes inside of this patch as well. But something that I wanted to note was when I was playing around with this wild speaker here, they have an ability, Conjure Animal. Conjure Animal now only lasts a certain number of turns. And this is true for many, potentially actually all of the tactical combat summons. So when you summon something inside of the battlefield, those units now expire. Sometimes 3 turns, sometimes 4, maybe it can be more than that. But this is a significant nerf because this was a great way to, what I would say, cheat in extra units. So battles are, of course, normally limited to 18 versus 18. Maybe at smaller scale, early game, you're looking sort of more like 6v6. But this was a great way to, summon in extra token units. We can still do that, and they still have strength. You just need to make sure that you make the most of them before their turns expire now. The very powerful, much loved, I assume, nature tomes like Roots, Beasts early on have also been nerfed. Now, there are, of course, many changes, I'm sure, across all of these tomes, but I want to highlight a few. Vine Prison is one example. This one can now no longer be enchanted, and as you can see, it only lasts for 1 turn in combat. So we're seeing some significant changes, not just in summoning, but also in some of these other areas that we may have traditionally leveraged for a little bit of extra power. Fair enough. And I suppose sticking with the theme of sort of early changes to tomes that may have stuck out a little bit too much, Tome of the Horde, another frequent fan favorite, not just for Spawnkin, but I also think that the Houndmaster, brilliant ability, brilliant unit, again because it has this Warhound ability. Another way to summon in an extra unit. The Warhound itself, as you can see, has had its hit points reduced. I believe it used to be 45, now it's 25. And likewise, the Hound Master is also weaker. So I think that what we're seeing across at least the early tomes are some changes around a few things that might have just stuck out a bit too much. They might have been just a little bit too strong for the era where they're unlocked. Much like how we've witnessed some significant changes to the Shadow Affinity in the development tree, the Souls economy has been, I would argue, given quite a buff as well. Some of the changes are in exchange for other things, so we're spending less souls but a bit more mana. But overall, on balance, firstly, we generate more souls. This soul harvest, this passive ability, now generates an extra soul than it used to across the board. So if you used to get 2 souls, you'll now get 3. Used to get 5, you'll now get 6, depending, of course, on the unit that you're fighting and how many souls you'd qualify for in the first place. So there's a passive ability now that's a little bit stronger to boost the souls economy. And there are other ways that they're trying to uplift our soul generation as well. Soul collection has changed, now gaining +6 soul income in exchange for 30 gold upkeep. Or maybe we look next door at Soulfire, for example, which now doesn't cost souls to cast, but instead costs mana. So small soul savings, say that 5 times fast, across the board to try and sort of boost us up a little bit. I should note here as well, I believe that Soul Collection has actually superseded or replaced a previous one, Soulbind Army, which was a useful way to generate some spells, but of course you had to target it, you had to be in conflict. Now we have a world spell to generate some extra base souls, regardless of whether we're fighting or not. Inside of the Tome of Necromancy, we also have a new effect, similar to a mod that I was playing fairly recently. This is Summon Corrupt Soul. Summon Corrupt Soul, of course, an undead unit with relatively low maintenance and an extra way to get a little bit of fight in your army. Of course, it's pretty focused in on the Souls economy itself, but also, you know, I'd note tier 3 unit, pretty high HP, low maintenance, soul generator. It seems like at tier 2, this is going to be a pretty decent pickup. And then we see other changes to help us save a little bit on souls and spend a little bit more on something else. So the Necromancer, for example, costs fewer souls than it used to, half, but you have to pay 70 bucks in gold to get it. And one of my favorite ones, because it's a major race transformation, in fact, only at tier 3. This is the Whiteborn transformation. You'll be very familiar with it, hopefully. Turns your units into the undead type, grants them lifesteal. This has changed a bit too. The cost of casting it has been moved from 200 souls to 100 souls and 300 mana. So, okay, it's going to cost you a bit more mana, but only half the number of souls. This potentially, I think, means that you'll probably be able to unlock it a little bit faster, considering your mana generation will likely be greater than your souls generation. We'll have to see, of course, how it plays out, because this patch is very much changing the meta, changing the early game in particular with the development tree, and some changes around these tomes too. Triumph are sharing more and more through their weekly developer diaries and updates, and of course, the patch is now around 10 days away, so we don't have long to wait, and I'm sure that there will be a myriad of other changes as well. One that I've found that I particularly like are some UI changes. So here, we'll just take a quick test. You can see that when I place an outpost, there's an indicator now of how long it will take. If an enemy does this, it will of course be surrounded in their border color and highlighted very brightly for you to see. It's small changes like that to the quality of life and user experience that I think will also make a difference through this patch. And with that, I'm going to end with quite an important summary. Firstly, of course, this is an early access look that I've got through a press preview build. Not a sponsored video in any way, but it is an early look. It's of course probably still subject to change, although given the amount of time and clear effort that's gone into it, I would expect a lot of these things to come through when the patch releases in, again, only around 10 days from now. I think we can summarize the changes in 2 parts. Firstly, there's a much greater need to focus in the early game. Focus in on the affinities you want, and why is that? Well, because everything's more expensive. The development tree, again, just another example of how the early game has been slowed to require more focus. Secondly, I think we've probably seen more customization with the features like the faction customizer, new traits, new spells and units. I think it's going to be a pretty decent update, and I'm looking forward to when you get your hands on it too. See you next time.